In the future, a terminally ill man decides to replace himself with a perfect clone, but the procedure turns out to be much more complicated than he anticipated.
Bullshit! I'm not done!
Well, it's not about you now.
At the beginning of the movie, we meet the artist Cameron Turner. On his way to work, he orders a cup of coffee and a chocolate bar from a robot, and a girl named Poppy sits down in front of him. He watches her with interest and decides to secretly draw her. After a few minutes, Poppy unwraps the chocolate bar and breaks off a piece. Cameron is surprised by the girl's behavior since she took it without asking. He then moves the package towards himself and also breaks off a piece, and the girl barely holds back laughter. She then gets off at the next stop, and Cameron continues on his way. Later in the evening, he discovers that the chocolate bar has been in his pocket the whole time, and he burns with embarrassment, then starts laughing hysterically. We jump ahead several years. The train incident becomes a happy memory of Cameron's first meeting with his wife. However, the man is now terminally ill. He decides to use innovative cloning technology, creating a perfect copy of himself with all his memories. The clone replaces the real person and continues his usual way of life. Cameron works on creating his own clone but is still undecided on whether to use this opportunity. After another session, Dr. Scott contacts him and informs him that his health is deteriorating rapidly, urging him to make a decision soon. Distraught, Cameron returns home and tries to act as if nothing is wrong. He greets his dog and checks in on Poppy and his son Corey. Then he goes to the bathroom, where he suddenly feels unwell. He desperately closes the door so that his wife won't see him in this state and learn about his illness. The next day, he goes to the cloning center, located in a picturesque area where people spend their remaining months. Here, he meets Dr. Scott, who suggests signing a contract, assuring him that the clone won't leave this place if he changes his mind. Cameron still hesitates and asks if his clone will inherit the disease, but Scott claims that the clone's DNA is modified, and the predisposition to the incurable illness is eliminated. Then, Scott introduces Cameron to Dalton, a psychologist and the center's chief specialist, and explains that all other staff members are replaced by AI. Dalton asks Cameron to disable all cameras on his lenses and watch before he approaches the clone. Cameron follows all instructions and enters the room. He is horrified to look at his double, who is not yet filled with his memories, and then hesitantly takes his clone's hand but cannot cope with the excitement and hastily leaves. Cameron goes home and once again doesn't know what to do next. He tries to live a normal life, interacting with his family and colleagues. One day, he recalls a conversation with Poppy and her twin brother Andre about cloning. His wife claimed that if clones are indistinguishable from real people, she has nothing against the technology. She would even be glad if a clone of her mother could be with her. Consumed by these thoughts, Cameron decides to contact Dr. Scott again. The woman tries to convince him to make the right choice and explains that clones have their consciousness process erased, so they consider themselves real. Scott also informs Cameron that he will be the third person to undergo this procedure and suggests living with his clone for a week before making a final decision. Scott introduces him to a female clone named Kate, who, like all her kind, has no knowledge of her origin. He enters the real estate company where she works and introduces himself as a regular client. During the conversation, he doesn't notice anything strange in her behavior that could reveal her as a clone. In the evening, Cameron returns home, and Poppy brings up the topic that in 7 months, they will be parents again. He barely holds back tears, realizing that he won't see the child, and almost reveals the truth about his illness but changes his mind, not wanting to upset her. Cameron contacts Dr. Scott again and returns to the mansion. Here, he meets the real Kate and tells her that her clone is doing well. Then he calls Poppy and informs her that he has to go on a week-long business trip. Concerned, his wife is skeptical about the news and suggests talking later. After some time, dressed in the provided clothing, he prepares for the memory transfer procedure. 6 hours later, Cameron wakes up, and Dr. Scott informs him that the clone now knows and remembers everything, even what he kept deep in his subconscious. Later, Cameron meets Kate again. During a walk in the forest, they share their experiences and notice that both he and the first clone had the same oncologist. In the evening, Cameron moves on to the next step, a cross-memory check. This allows him to ensure that all of the clone's memories, conveniently named Jack, match his own. To do this, he must relive several vivid and crucial moments of his life. The first memory is his meeting with his wife. He encounters Poppy for the second time on the train, apologizes for the chocolate bar misunderstanding, and gives her a portrait as an apology. She admires his talent, and as he returns to his seat, Poppy calls him back and returns the drawing. Then memories of the birth and upbringing of their son flash in Cameron's consciousness, followed by Poppy's grief over the death of her brother Andre. Finally, the synchronization process is complete. Dr. Scott and Dalton successfully awaken the clone, but promise to introduce him to Cameron only in the morning. Scott explains to Jack that the freckle on the palm is the only difference between him and Cameron and that it will help them figure out who is who. In the evening, Cameron communicates with his son through video call, playing an online game. Suddenly, he feels unwell again and barely interrupts the conversation before losing consciousness in a seizure. The next day, he tells Kate about his fear of suddenly dying and not saying goodbye to his family, and then prepares to meet Jack. At first, a shocked Cameron watches as Jack shares incredibly accurate memories of Poppy with Dr. Scott. Finally, he enters Jack's room, who is very upset about what is happening. Jack recalls many details from their shared past, impressing Cameron with feelings and emotions identical to his own. Later, Cameron continues to observe the conversations between Jack and Dr. Scott, during which she checks his memories. Cameron still struggles to come to terms with the fact that someone else knows absolutely everything about his life. Soon, the format of the sessions changes, and now Dr. Scott talks to Jack in Cameron's presence. This time, Jack remembers how Andre gave Poppy a piano, delighting her incredibly. Then he tells the story of Andre's motorcycle accident on a mountain road, Poppy's depression, and the nightmares that haunt him due to this tragedy. Cameron listens intently to Jack, and, immersed in his own emotions, he suddenly responds to the question instead. After a moment of silence, the men have lunch together, once again demonstrating identical habits and preferences. The time comes for Jack's first contact with Poppy. They casually chat via video call, and Cameron, in anger, watches as his wife doesn't notice any difference between them. Unable to hold back, Cameron ends the conversation, leading to a conflict between him and Jack.
You are not me!
After a series of mutual accusations and an almost started fight, Cameron begins to feel unwell, and he retreats to his room. Once again, he decides to tell the truth to his family and cancel the replacement. A little later, Jack goes to Cameron to have a calm conversation and convince him not to be selfish, allowing Poppy to peacefully give birth to their second child and be happy. However, Cameron is still not ready to permanently part with his family. The next day, Cameron is sent home for 3 days so that he can say goodbye to his loved ones, but before leaving, he is asked to activate the cameras in his lenses so that Jack can see everything that happens. He reluctantly agrees, bids farewell to Kate, and leaves. However, as Cameron approaches his home, he experiences a seizure and loses consciousness in the middle of the street. Concerned, Dr. Scott sends a car for him and urges him to return to the hospital.
If you stay and you have another seizure without supervision, you could die in front of your family.
Cameron is brought back to the center, and while he sleeps under the influence of medication, Dr. Scott informs Dalton that Jack will be going home in the morning. Dalton thinks it's still too early, but Scott insists, as Poppy is eagerly awaiting her husband's return. Jack is given all of Cameron's belongings and is warned that they will monitor his progress for 2 weeks. If everything goes well, the memories of the procedure will be erased from his mind, and he won't return to the center. Jack is also cautioned that Cameron will have access to recordings from his lenses, and if successful, he won't be able to stop anything. Jack returns home, and his wife welcomes him joyfully, oblivious to any deception. They spend the entire evening talking and laughing, but then Jack encounters a problem. The dog doesn't recognize him and won't stop barking. Meanwhile, almost 24 hours later, Cameron regains consciousness. It takes him some time to understand where he is and what is going on. When Scott tells him that Jack has already gone to his family in his place, Cameron is overcome with rage. He accuses the doctor of not allowing him to say goodbye to his wife and child, but
You're dying.
Stop!
Resigned to the inevitable, Cameron demands to see the videos from Jack's lenses and spends days watching the recordings. He also visits Kate, who is now bedridden, and they communicate and laugh for the last time. After her passing, her ashes are scattered into the lake, and Cameron feels truly alone. After some time, Jack begins to remove his lenses more frequently, which concerns Cameron. Dr. Scott explains that sometimes he wants to be alone with his family, and it's completely normal. However, Cameron doesn't trust the doctor. He senses that something is wrong and notices peculiarities in Jack's actions. One day, he even has a nightmare. Cameron, haunted by paranoia, steals his broken watch from the office, which Jack wasn't given to Jack, and escapes from the center. Using the watch, he activates a boat and heads home, preparing for the worst. Entering the house, he carefully goes upstairs and enters his office. He sees numerous works that Jack has already created and reviews their correspondence with Poppy. Suddenly, the door to the office opens, and Jack appears in the doorway. Horrified, Cameron jumps up, but Jack asks him not to worry. Jack understands Cameron's visit and allows him to say goodbye to his family. They exchange clothes and go downstairs. Suddenly, the dog rushes into the kitchen. Perplexed, looking at both Jack and Cameron, the frightened animal runs away. Jack asks Cameron to be careful, and he hides in the pantry. Cameron goes to his son, wakes him up, and takes him to the kitchen. He pours him apple juice and suggests pretending they're drinking beer. He teaches his son to eat edamame and tells him that his mom loved drinking cold beer with this snack. Cameron spends the last moments with his son, hugs him, and can't hold back tears because of the inevitable parting. After putting his son to bed and calming down a bit, he goes into the bedroom and lies down next to Poppy. She sees that Cameron is upset, and he says he had a very bad dream. She hugs him, comforting him, and Cameron suggests naming their future child Andre after her brother. Poppy happily agrees, and Cameron cries again because of overwhelming emotions. When Poppy falls asleep, Cameron and Jack change back into their original clothes and say goodbye in the car. Cameron thanks his clone for the opportunity to spend the last moments with his family and asks him to take care of them. Cameron continues to peacefully live out the remaining months, drawing and interacting with new clients who want to learn more about the cloning experience. 2 weeks later, Dr. Scott informs Cameron that Jack has successfully been freed from memories of the procedure, so now he will live a completely normal and full life without any interference. The doctor also mentions that Jack left a small surprise for him. Cameron approaches the screen and sees a touching video where Jack asks Poppy to say that she loves him. The doomed man looks at his wife and can't hold back tears. What would you do in the place of the hero? Would you tell your loved ones the truth and doom them to suffering, or would you provide them with a happy life by sacrificing your peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.